Hi everyone, I'm Laura and this is Lalo Yoga and Wellness. Today I have something I think is going to be really fun. It's more of a tutorial than it is an actual flow, but it's about something that I feel really strongly about is very near and dear to my heart. And that is having some options and some variations for what you can be doing during any yoga practice session that you're involved in. So the reason why I think this is so important is that your teacher, whether it is a virtual class or an in-person class in a studio or in a gym, they are doing everything they can to create a general class for maybe 20 to 30 or more people who they don't really know what their potential issues might be, who's got a hip issue or a shoulder issue. And so that's why sometimes when you go to a class, you may have a teacher who either doesn't offer a lot of options, maybe they move through a quickly paced vinyasa flow so they don't really have time for it, or maybe they don't know a lot of options, or maybe that's just not their thing. And that's okay. They're there to try to provide that general practice for people to be able to go through. So keep that in mind, that that's what their purpose is, unless it's a class that's specifically for maybe a hip rehab class or, shoulder surgery rehab type of a class. But what I want you to keep in mind is that no matter what practice you're doing, whether it's your own practice or one that you're taking with a teacher, the journey is really up to you. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure type of journey. So what I want you to consider is that if a teacher in particular is creating a class or a movement that doesn't work for your body, it's time for you to choose the adventure that you want to take and that you might need to take based on what's going on with your body. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how you can make some adjustments or even completely change out some movements so that it works for you. The first thing that I want to talk about is props. Before we even get into any movement, I highly recommend the use of various props. And for some reason that I can't quite figure out, a lot of people are really reluctant to use props to help them throughout their practice. But these things were created to help you be able to deepen your practice. So rather it's in assisting you and supporting you through potential challenges you might have with your body, or maybe you're just new and you're not that flexible or mobile yet, and so you want to make sure that you are creating a practice with really good form that's safe for your body versus trying to get into a position you can't quite reach into and compromising your form along the way. So let's talk about some of the most important props that you can have. My number one prop is yoga blocks. So you can use blocks or bricks. This is a block. It's fairly large and it's made out of cork. But you could even go with these inexpensive ones. You can get them at any discount store. It's like $7. I personally prefer the cork ones only because they're a little bit heavier. I feel like they're a little bit more stable. And the cost difference isn't that much. These are maybe, I think, about $15 versus $7. And then the yoga bricks, which are just a little bit smaller. This is a brick. You can see the size difference here. It really just kind of depends on what you want. But if you think about a yoga block, its primary purpose is to help bring the floor closer to you. So rather that's you sitting on a block, whether it's you reaching toward a block, is going to help take away some of the challenges that we might have based on our mobility through some joints, or even our flexibility in our muscles. So I highly encourage it. It helps you be able to get into whatever the position is you're trying to reach without compromising your form. The second thing that I want to talk about is some of us have knee issues. So there are a few things that can help you out, right? So first and foremost actually is your mat. So I use the Manduka Pro mat because it's very, very dense and provides a lot of cushion for your knee. It's not cheap, I'm not going to lie. However, I felt like it's been worth the investment. They have a lifetime guarantee. This mat is over 8 years old and looks as good as it did and works as good as it did when I first bought it. And prior to that, I had been buying some inexpensive alternatives and they just didn't hold out. They'd start to stretch, they'd start to flake. If they were super cushiony, they were almost too cushiony, and they'd move a lot while I was using them, and so I finally decided it was worth the investment to have a thicker mat. Some of the other things, though, as I mentioned, you can get knee pads. You just place it under your knees, so if you have some knee issues or soreness in your knees, this is something that will help cushion that. This is just another version. These are sort of for just one knee at a time. And then you can also use something like this, which both knees can easily sit on. And you just put it on top of your mat and give you a little bit of extra cushion. The next thing I want to talk about is your yoga strap. And again, very inexpensive tool that you can easily throw into your yoga bag. And it's all about making your arms a little bit longer. So if you are working towards a stretch that maybe your arms can't quite reach, now all of a sudden you have that reach. And you're able to, again, maintain good form while you work toward that particular goal. And then as you start to gain more flexibility, you can start to work your way down that strap, and then eventually maybe you're able to drop it. But it's definitely a way to help extend your arms. It also can give support to limbs that maybe you're having some challenges keeping supported. So you can always wrap it underneath and lift that limb using your yoga straps. Another fun thing is a bolster. This is a round one. You can also get long ones, but these are especially great for any kind of a yin practice, one where you're working on more restorative poses. Maybe you're on the floor a lot more. Great for sitting on, elevating the hips, especially if you have some hip challenges like some of us do. And so definitely a worthwhile investment. These are filled with buckwheat, so they're a little bit flexible, but they're still nice and firm. So they stay pretty comfortable throughout. You could also use this for a knee or your hips or any other thing that you really want to give some additional support to. I wouldn't recommend trying to stand on it. It's more for kneeling or lying down or sitting on top of. Finally, I want to talk about the use of a chair. This might not be too practical in a studio or a gym setting, although you might be surprised. Some of them have chairs or other types of stability, bars or something that you can use. But at home, it's definitely something that you can use. And that might be just to steady yourself as you are coming into some balance movements. It gives you that little extra security to feel comfortable with it. It's also a great way to assist yourself on the way up and down from the floor. So don't be afraid to bring a chair in. Again, all of these props are designed to help support your practice, support you in being stronger and safer as you move through your everyday practice. Now that we've talked about some of the props that you can use to assist you in various movements, let's start to talk a little bit about how you can either alter some of your movements or trade them out for other movements altogether throughout your practice. One of the main areas of concern that a lot of people have is their wrists. They start to hurt a little bit during class. First off, always make sure that you're kind of warming up those wrists a little bit. Just some simple wrist rolls will help kind of get them loosened up and ready to go. We spend a lot of time here or here, and so those wrists can get really locked out and tight. So don't be alarmed if you hear a little Rice Krispie crackling going on there in those wrists. They're just loosening up, and that's totally fine. The other things that you can do as we're moving through some of the movements is to take some of that pressure off of the wrist. So this is where your blocks come into play. Let's say you're in a tabletop position. You can place your hands on top of these blocks, and that's going to help shift your weight back slightly and take some of the pressure off of your wrists. Another thing that you might want to consider is at any point you can just come onto your knuckles And you're going to create a stronger lever here with no pressure on the wrist. I don't think you could do an entire class solely on your knuckles, but it's certainly something that you can sort of go in and out of as your wrists are starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable. One of the other things that you can consider is there's a lot of pressure here in table, so again, these knuckles might work well for that. As we come into any down dog position, you can move into extended puppy instead. So similar to a child's pose, but we are keeping the hips up nice and high. That's another alternative. You can have your forearms on the floor. That takes a lot of the pressure out of the wrist as you lift the hips up high. So you're going to put all of that pressure onto your forearms instead of taking it all through the wrists. Again, you could be using a chair for balance, so that may help you. And if you're concerned about going through a vinyasa flow and getting down onto the floor is a challenge onto your wrists, or some of the alternatives are uncomfortable for your wrist, consider as you go through your flow, a typical sun salutation, that upward salute, right? You come into your forward fold, halfway lift. At this point, you start to move down to the floor. You can take that floor movement out altogether. Come up into a chair pose, sweep back into a twist, sweep forward, sweep back on the other side, sweep forward. And at this point, the people that have moved through that plank, chaturanga, cobra, or up dog and are coming into down dog, you can either meet them in a down dog, so come back down if your wrists are up to it, or you could wait until they come to halfway lift and forward fold and meet them there. So it's really just about taking out that piece that you're uncomfortable with and moving into something you're more comfortable with. You can also use chair as a way to get down to the floor if you don't want to put those wrists on the floor. So you're in that chair pose, come down on one knee, take that leg behind you and sit down. And now you're on the floor and you haven't put your hands on the floor whatsoever. Always another option. Again, all of these options are really going to be dependent on you, what level of variation you're looking for, what kind of challenges you personally are experiencing. So play around with those and see if any of them are resonating for you. Another challenge that a lot of people have is with their shoulders, especially if maybe they've had some shoulder surgery recently. And so a lot of our Warrior II arms or crescent arms, any of these things where the arms and the shoulders are extended and you are now putting a lot of a long lever pressure into your shoulders, can really be helped if you just bring those hands to heart center. So if you're in a crescent lunge, instead of here, you could be here. If you're in a Warrior II, you can be here instead of having those arms extended. And a lot of the options that we just talked about for the wrist release are also going to help if putting pressure into the shoulders is something that's uncomfortable for you as well. Let's talk about the knees for just a second. A lot of us have some arthritis in the knees or knee injuries or rehabs that we're trying to work through. And even sitting like this might be really uncomfortable for your knees. So it's where your blocks come into play, or that bolster, it's going to take some of that pressure off of the knees. The other thing is anytime we're in a kneeling position, you can bring into play your mat and have your knees on that mat just to give it that extra cushion and extra support for the knees. If it's really uncomfortable to put any kind of pressure on the knees, if you're in a hands position, you can always lift the knees up. This is actually more challenging in some ways, requires some additional upper body strength. So if you're finding that even a simple tabletop is too much pressure on the knees, lift those knees off the floor and turn it into a hover movement, or even extend your legs out, make it into a plank movement, and that'll help take some of the pressure off of your knees. If it's sitting something like this, or maybe people are in malasana, again, using your blocks to sit on top of it is your best bet for taking an alternative movement to help protect the knees. Another challenge that a lot of people face is vertigo. Sometimes it's just a matter of slowing down a little bit. That getting from the floor and up and back down again can change your blood pressure pretty quickly. So you want to think about moving a little more slowly and giving your body some time to adjust. The other thing that can really help you is taking out any inversions. So all that means is anything that brings your head below your heart. So table might be just fine, but even coming into that extended puppy, you notice that the head comes below the heart. Child's pose can even sometimes do the same thing for people. So focus on keeping your head above the heart. If you need to take out a child's pose, you can come down to here, make sure that head stays level. Take your gaze a little bit higher on the mat. Watch out for cranking up in the neck here. We want to keep the neck as long as we possibly can. I would remove any down dogs because that's definitely going to be an uncomfortable position for you. And we talked about some of the alternatives that you could do there. Chair pose is definitely a great place to go. While everybody else is moving through a down dog, you're working quite hard, you're really working through those legs, and you're definitely going to help avoid some of that vertigo. Take out a forward fold and just replace it with a simple halfway lift, again, keeping the head above the heart. And maybe you want to consider taking out movements that are requiring you to get down and up, down and up, down and up, because your body might be taking a little bit of time to adjust. Sometimes we have some inner ear issues going on, especially during allergy season. So that's okay. Just stay down or up and do some alternative movements while the class is moving up and down so that you can start to protect yourself. The final thing that I really want to talk about is hips. And this is a big one for me because I have some significant issues with my hips. This hip here has a lot of arthritis, actually they both do, and this one has a tear in the labrum, so I don't have a lot of range of motion in that hip. So for me, that means when I come into tree pose, I'm not going to get that knee way open, and that's okay. So I can just take it low and supported, or maybe on the calf, and I take the knee as far as I can, not into discomfort. So this is the thing that's really important for you to keep in mind, is the difference between taking yourself to your edge and pushing past your edge. If you're dealing with just maybe a lack of mobility and you're trying to increase that, then you may ramp up your intensity. But if you're dealing with an injury or some other sort of issue like arthritis that I'm dealing with, it's best not to push past and get into those super intense poses, because you're not doing yourself any good. You're not increasing your range of motion. You're really only increasing the chances that that injury is going to get worse. This is where I have to throw out a caveat about hot yoga. And I know a lot of people love their hot yoga, and I would never tell someone don't do it. The one thing that I would caution against is part of the reason why a lot of people love it is they feel like they're a lot more flexible and they can move further, which is true. And the challenge with that is sometimes people will move too far, farther than their true range of motion allows, and that's where some injury can occur. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind and be really wary of. The other thing that I want to address when it comes to hips is the use of your blocks. Anytime you're sitting, if you're really feeling that tightness in the hips, you can certainly sit up on a block, and that's going to help elevate you. I'm sure many of you have noticed that I don't typically sit cross-legged, and that's why. It's my hip issue. So instead of a cross-legged, I sit in bound angle, and that gives a little less pressure here in the hips while still allowing for some hip opening. The final thing that I want to talk about is just a general tip that will help you in almost any position or any challenge that you're having, and that has to do with your range of motion. And so if you are getting options from your teacher that allow for something that's a little less range of motion, it's okay to go for that. Remember, This is your journey. It's your practice. So follow those options if they are given to you. And if they're not, you're going to have to bring in some of your own. Perfect example of that might be a high side lunge versus a surfer's lunge. You're going to get that same nice stretch that you're looking for in the inner thigh. Far less pressure on the knee, and a little bit easier on that extended leg. Malasana, you might be here, maybe you're here, maybe you're here, maybe you're here, maybe you're sitting on a block. There are a lot of ways that you can just take the range of motion and decrease it a little bit to make it work for you. I hope some of these tips have helped you. Try them out, see which ones work for you. I'd love it if you would drop a comment below if there are some other options or variations that you like to use in your practice that really help you be able to continue to move with the class or move on your own, but in a way that works for you. I'll see you next time. Namaste.